There is chaos brewing in Milwaukee right now with the firing of their most recent coach, Adrian Griffin. It has left a void in their new head coaching role, which was then filled by the one and only Doc Rivers. Now, before I even continue, I want to just say I made a video before and saying that, oh man, the one thing that they do not need after they just fired their brand new head coach is to get Doc Rivers. And then as soon as I'm about to press upload, I see late at night Doc Rivers is the new head coach. I mean, this is a dramatic change for the Milwaukee Bucks because I think this kind of goes backwards in times, or regression to the means, if you will, that they don't really need. And that's if, Doc Rivers continues to be the coach that he's always has been, historically has been, and has not changed his coaching philosophy. But if he has, I mean, of course, that's great. But we can only go off of what we know and what we see. And recently, he was the coach of the 76ers. And listen, if you watch the 76ers game, of course, they had talent. They had Embiid, they had Harden, they had Maxey, they had Tobias. But the team offensively just did not make sense. It was a lot of stagnant flow. And Embiid was the biggest culprit of this. He still kind of is with the way that his game style is, but at least it's more, efficient offense in the 76ers now. But before, when it was just Doc Rivers, man, dude, everything kind of just stopped. And still, even with James Harden was on the team, everything kind of like just stopped. But at least he incorporated a little bit more, passing, a little bit more ball movement. And at least that kind of got them farther in the playoffs than and many people really expected them, especially when they were playing without Joel Embiid. But this season for the Bucks has been a little bit up and down. I made a couple videos this year saying that Damian Lillard is struggling this year. That could be, for personal reasons, as a lot of people really know, but it also could be from just straight up basketball and offensive scheme. The Milwaukee Bucks is not necessarily a great offensive team, and this is kind of crazy to say, knowing that the Milwaukee Bucks is quite literally 30-13. And so when you're hearing people say that they're not that great of an offensive team, you have to think about this. With all the problems that they have on offense, are they winning in spite of that, or are they winning because of that? Now, what do I mean by this? I mean that there are a lot of issues in their offense, right? There's a lot of stagnant ball movement. There's not really much happening on the pick and roll. Giannis and Damian Lillard is still trying to figure out what they're going to do in the pick and roll. I honestly believe that they would have been able to figure it out by now, but with the way that their offense is set up and has always been set up, it really predicates a lot on the fact that they can space the floor with, Brook Lopez getting the center out the way, which then opens up for Giannis Antetokounmpo to do whatever he wants by getting into the paint. And this is extremely expounded upon when you look at the fast break metrics, where, they're one of the best fast break teams because they pass the ball to Giannis and everybody just moves out the way and clears the paint. Before, in times past, one of the best ways to stop Giannis is to create that proverbial wall where you don't really give him that much space to kind of like go towards the paint, and you pretty much clog up the paint. But that also leaves shooters on the side. But if you don't have, historically great shooters, they're not going to get the job done when you pass them the ball. But now they actually have some pretty good shooters on their team. And so you can't really make that wall anymore. And so you look at that and you say, well, okay, then that's a good offense. But what happens in the half-court setting? Their half-court setting in the offense is just okay. Damian Lillard and Giannis are two profoundly talented players. And when you have those two players on the same team, especially with the way that the team is constructed when it comes to role players, and everybody who's seen my videos understand how much I love role players and how much I greatly value role players. This team is good because of goodness sake. They have a lot of good parts to it, and so is this going to work? But it can still have problems. And when you're watching the games, you see that there were still a lot of problems. And that really comes down to the pick and roll and how, Damian Lillard and Giannis play that pick and roll, because everybody else is going to hit their shots and do whatever they need to do because they're that good. They're slightly above average role players that are on this team. But when it comes to playoffs, are they good enough to beat the Boston Celtics? Because the Boston Celtics are the best team in the East right now. And so in order to beat them, because that's what, the East is now becoming, the teams, whoever is good enough to beat the Boston Celtics, because the Boston Celtics has an easy trip to the Eastern Conference Finals. You have to figure out, is my offense good enough to beat their defense? Because they have one of the best defenses in the league as well, sitting at number 2. And if you don't have a very consistent offense, then you're going to struggle. But the offense is really not even the biggest problem with the Milwaukee Bucks this season. It has always been their defense. Man, with the way that you expected them to bounce back from last year and having one of the best defenses in the league to being one of the bottom 10, things just does not make sense. And a lot of it comes down to how they play the pick and roll and their drop coverage. But at the end of the day, they've always kind of been the team to do drop coverage and put people into positions where they have to make the most inefficient shot in basketball. Unless you're one of those people who are one of the best mid-range shooters of all times, like DeMar DeRozan or Devin Booker. But for the most part, everybody does not want to take that shot. Everybody wants to get at least a little bit closer or right behind the three-point line. But man, have they been getting cooked on defense, especially in a half-court setting. And this is what's really held them back. Because when you're having struggle games against the Detroit Pistons, you're kind of questioning, in what world is a 30-13 team having these tough games against these teams that are terrible? Some of these teams are not teams that they should be in close games with. And a lot of their wins, and listen, they still pull it out because they're still ultra-talented. But a lot of their wins come from them struggling against teams that are probably like just at 500, third, fourth ranked teams, or even teams who are a little bit around the play-in kind of like brackets. They're almost always having tough games. And it takes Giannis having 30, 40 points a game for them to even win a little bit comfortably by even 10 points. And so with that in mind, and especially with the reports hearing that, the team lost respect for Adrian Griffin, and you probably seen clips of Adrian Griffin not having the team's total respect and total attention, that it makes sense the firing happening. And I understand the firing happening. I know a lot of people look at they're 30-13, so why would they get rid of their coach? It doesn't really make any sense. But listening to all the reasons that I listed, it kind of does. Because there's only one team for the East to beat this year, and that is the Boston Celtics. And if you do not have the team to beat the Boston Celtics, there needs to be somewhat of a change. But the issue with the Milwaukee Bucks is that they, on paper, have the team to beat the Boston Celtics, but with the way that the offense is schemed, it's not good enough. And don't even talk about defense, because the defense is atrocious. And so we have this vacancy in the head coaching position. And it's just one of those things where I saw the reports and I said, please let it not be Doc Rivers. This has to be a joke. And little do you know, Doc Rivers is confirmed the head coach for the Milwaukee Bucks. It's broad day robbery. It is broad day robbery. Because if you look at historically, now this does not account for the fact that he may have changed. He may have different ideas that he is relatively known for. Unless something has changed in his philosophy, the Milwaukee Bucks is still going to have these same problems. Probably not so much defensively. Maybe he'll be able to kind of get them together defensively. But when it comes to the playoffs, and everybody knows this, right? This is quite a known phenomenon of Doc Rivers just kind of letting the players do whatever they do without actually providing much coaching in like the last 3-4 minutes of the game where it's actually crunch time. You're going to have a lot of problems, going to have a lot of issues. And in my personal opinion, I feel like firing Mike Budenholzer, and even with all the faults that he has been one of the biggest detriments and probably one of the biggest consequential things that the Bucks organization has did. Because right now, not only are they paying 3 coaches for this 1 year, but they're receiving the backlash from it. It is not Mike Budenholzer's fault that Giannis got hurt in round 1 against the Heat, and the Heat ended up winning out. I mean, that's your biggest driver on offense and defense. I mean, this is the same coach that, even with the faults of him not being the best coach in terms of, coaching on offense, but at least having a good defense, even with all his faults in his coaching philosophy, he is still a better coach than Doc Rivers. I mean, he proved it multiple times in beating them in the regular season. And so it just doesn't make sense for them to make a complete lateral move. Matter of fact, a move that some would even say is a regression to the past. It just doesn't make sense why you pick him. And so if you're going to pick somebody, it's already a difficult time anyway, because there's not really that many coaches on the market right now. But if you're going to fire somebody, I think one of the worst things to do is to have somebody who is, by and large, probably the same person who's going to implement the same similar system, and having to teach the whole roster a different way of playing basketball, which isn't that necessarily different, because he also has to learn how he's going to use Giannis. And I know he's been an informal coach to Adrian Griffin, so some would say he probably sabotaged him. But hey, listen, it's whoever's closest to the team. It is one of those things where you have to be 1,000% confident that whatever he brings to the team is going to be worth it. And in my personal opinion, from what I have seen, it has never been worth it. He has won 1 championship, and even the people that was on that championship credits him, of course. But in terms of creating a dynasty and getting back to where they once were, A lot of players, even on that championship team, look back and say, you know what, Doc Rivers wasn't necessarily the best coach. Even people say that on the Clippers. People say that on the Sixers. It happens every single year, and it is broad day robbery how this keeps happening. There are so many coaches who are deserving of head coaching opportunities that are gatekept by legacy coaches who continually comes back every single year, whether or not they have improved themselves, whether or not they have changed their coaching philosophies, whether or not they have even shown that they're even a coach that can get them to the championship. They keep coming back because they are well known, and they're probably nice. They're probably good people. They probably have some really good relationships with a lot of people in the top front office. But it all comes down to winning basketball games. And Doc Rivers, for the most part, is pretty good in the regular season, but when it comes to the postseason, he is terrible. And so I will always hold out the fact that, maybe Doc Rivers has changed his coaching philosophy. Maybe this is a new Doc Rivers. But it only takes me a couple games to see this is what we've always seen. And the Milwaukee Bucks is now in purgatory, even though they are 30-13. And then there's a conversation that needs to be had, and this is the last thing I'll say, but there's a conversation that needs to be had on Giannis. Because there have been so many coaches that Giannis has had in his career, especially recently, that you can argue that he kind of drove them out. And if he continues to drive out coaches, it kind of begs the question, is he the type of player you want your organization to be built around?